It's time. You go in pieces, asshole.
From her, you bitch!
Your move, creep.
Hello and welcome. My name is Larry Reid and this is Your Move Creep, the podcast celebrating action cinema from 1980 to the year 2000, from the east to the west, from the worst to the best. So at the beginning of 2025, I made a pledge to shine a little bit of a bigger light on my love of and continuing journey into the world of Asian cinema. So who better to join me on this trip than YouTuber, podcaster, and new friend of the show, Mr. Johnny Burnett, aka the Fanatical Dragon. Hi Johnny, welcome to the show, and how are you doing today?
I'm great. Very, very happy to be here. Long time listener, first time caller.
I'm glad we've been missing each other. Last year we had a bit of a passing ships in the night when we were watching some of the Jackie Chan police story movies, and
I had a GFT. I think I saw the back of your glorious head at the same time as seeing as Yes Madam.
I can see the back of your head at one point, but we were just too shy to talk to each other. But thankfully, we've got to go on the podcast and we can talk to a little bit, learn about each other now. So, Johnny, we always begin the episode with finding a little bit more about the guest. So, Johnny, can you tell me a little bit about your experiences with action movies growing up? Were you a fan of action movies when you were a young lad?
Oh, completely. I'm probably, I don't know if I'm the oldest that you've had on the show yet, but I think I'm getting up there. I think I've got a couple of years on you. So I kind of got into action pre-VHS, right? And VHS was a pretty big deal when it came around. So for me, like, Ground Zero was definitely, all came from my dad, probably, and the rare times that my dad wasn't at work. And so watching movies with my dad just on TV. So Bruce Lee and James Bond were the two like first cornerstones in my house of action, right? Probably You Only Live Twice, I think, was the first James Bond movie I can really, really remember kind of grabbing me, because it was my first time ever seeing Japan on anything, like even just becoming aware of the concept of Japan. God knows how young I was, maybe 4 or 5-ish sort of age, I think.
Wow, okay.
And I think probably a tiny bit older than that when I first saw Bruce Lee, and that kind of started this sort of obsession with like martial arts and those sorts of movies. And I was just like a sponge at that age, the way that you are.
Yeah.
So as soon as we got our first VHS player, which we rented from Telecare, I think, because they couldn't afford to buy them in those days, they were so expensive, and all of these video stores started popping up.
Yeah.
And I think we're about a similar enough age that you remember where at that point in time, everywhere, even if it wasn't a video rental shop, all of a sudden had VHS tapes to rent. So like you go to the newsagent and they'd have a wee rack of tapes. So
Yeah.
Everywhere. It was such this massive explosion, and I just soaked up as much as I possibly could. So that's when I discovered Arnie, and when I just kind of discovered sort of Sly and all the other kind of big kind of early 80s kind of action titans. And around the same sort of time, Jackie Chan, because that was like in the beginnings of us first starting to kind of get Jackie movies. And then I think by the time that I got to being about 10, 11, got my first paper round, so then had a disposable income that I could start buying VHS tapes. And around that time, the Made in Hong Kong label kind of started off, the Made in Hong Kong VHS label. And that label was like, opened up my entire universe for East Asian action. So that was what introduced me to Shaw Brothers for the first time. Really got me into like the early Jackies, because up until that point I hadn't been able to see Drunken Master and Snake and Eagle's Shadow. I think my first Jackie was Cannonball Run 2.
Yes.
My first experience of him. So getting to see proper Jackie Chan movies, and like Operation Condor and Project A, and I think then also by extension Sammo Hung, and got a tiny bit older and had a flatmate who was my sort of movie mate, and we would spread the wealth, so we would double the amount of tapes we could buy. So I would be buying the Shaw Brothers tapes and he would kind of get the Sammo tapes. So between the two of us, we could kind of get almost every tape Made in Hong Kong put out.
Wow.
And got heavily into basically their entire catalogue. John Woo stuff was in there too. I think the first time I saw The Killer and A Better Tomorrow 2 was all through that label. Tiger on the Beat, which we spoke about just before we started recording.
Yep.
All that sort of stuff came around at that same sort of time, and also with an older brother who was sort of showing me stuff that he probably shouldn't. So I remember seeing Alien and Aliens when I was way too young, and The Shining, and so all kind of got all my kind of too young to really identify genre at that point. You're just consuming absolutely everything, but action was probably the in retrospect, the genre that's made the most impact and the one that I've stuck with for the longest and still drives most of my watching and purchasing habits to this very day.
So do you have kind of a kind of special kind of martial arts movie for, right, this is a film that just made me, because obviously as we talked about at the beginning of the show, you are one of the guys I look as an aficionado of martial arts films, especially Shaw Brothers movies and coverage of Shaw Scope things I see in the background you've got there of
Yeah.
for your reviews. So was there a special Jackie movie or Samo movie, or maybe even like, you know, a favorite Shaw Brothers movie you had at that time was like, right, this is what I want to pour my passion into these movies?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and again, it was through Made in Hong Kong, so it was really because they didn't have that many Shaw's movies in their list. So the ones that I saw really early on, which has maybe ruined me for all my years to come, is I saw Five Deadly Venoms and I saw Dirty Ho and Mad Monkey Kung Fu really early. Like I think they were some of the first Made in Hong Kong Shaw's tapes that I picked up, and then loved them so much that I kind of think I picked up some of the other ones that they had in their collection, which wasn't that many. I think there's maybe only sort of 6 or 7 Shaw Brothers titles that Made in Hong Kong had, but they always had like liner notes inside the way that LPs did back in the day, inside the VHS tape. And so they'd have like filmographies of the actors and the director. So I read about all these titles way before I could ever see them, and then you track down books about Hong Kong cinema and start reading about these things long before I ever got a chance to actually track down the tapes. And I think Ground Zero for Chang Che was Five Deadly Venoms, and Ground Zero for me for Lau Gar Lung was Dirty Ho, and Dirty Ho probably remains my single favourite Lau Gar Lung movie to this day.
Wow.
I don't necessarily argue that it's his best work. I think we'll get onto that a little bit later once we get into the movie we're going to talk about today, but I think it's certainly maybe his most enjoyable and the one that still maybe means the most to me, because it was my first love. It was my first Lau Gar Lung love. And I think it's just something that I absolutely adore. So yeah, I think that was probably my first two as far as Shaw's go, and there was something about their movies where the production quality was so much higher than the sort of basher or lower budget movies. And even as much as I love Drunken Master and Snake and Eagle's Shadow, there was always that sense of where in those movies it was just a few guys going out to a field in the middle of nowhere and just beating the shit out of each other. But Shaw's was a slightly different animal, right? They had these massive, huge sets, and you could tell it was all in a backdrop, but it was super stylized, and it just seemed like the production values were a little bit higher, even watching them in pretty ropey quality, which when I finally did start getting some of the elusive titles that I was reading about in the books, a lot of the time it was bootlegs. And I can remember vividly sometime in the 90s, when I'm maybe 18 or 19 by this point, making a pilgrimage down to London because I'd heard about this shop in London called Flash Legs Kung Fu in Clapham Common, right, which was run by, I think, guys from a Kung Fu school that were just basically getting copies of these films, God knows from where, and just bootlegging them themselves. So it was 2 VHS machines through the back of the shop, probably. And they were just burning up copies. So it was a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I can imagine.
That was the first time I saw like Invincible Pole Fighter, Diagram Pole Fighter, and the first time I saw Legendary Weapons of China. And in 1990, whatever, like maybe 1996 or 1997, I paid 20 or 25 quid for each of those on VHS, right?
Wow.
Which is maybe probably 40 quid in today's money. And they were shitty quality, I think. And half of the sections of the action would drop into Spanish or Italian because that's where they'd been able to cobble together like a complete panel. So all of a sudden, I can remember vividly because it was an English dub version, I think, and at some point somebody asked Gordon Liu, "What weapon will you use for this next challenger?" And he just cut straight into Spanish, goes "Los Poros." And I was like, oh, funny. But it just in some ways made it all the more special, right? So yeah, it became like a holy grail quest for me, or like an Indiana Jones style quest to track down these movies, and that was maybe part of the fun because you couldn't just. Now we're spoiled; it's an embarrassment of riches now.
Oh yeah, definitely is.
But back then, I think the quest of it was a big part of why I got so into it and so into those movies, particularly maybe because they were so elusive and so hard to get. And then round about the sort of early-ish 2000s, the floodgates opened and Celestial realised they were sitting on a gold mine, and they started putting out their own DVDs of the Shaw Bros. Movies that you can import from Yes Asia for not too much money. back in pre-COVID days when postage was a bit more manageable and stuff. And they would do deals where you buy 4 and you get a 5th for free and stuff. So
Oh,
at
wow.
that point, really started consuming like massively, loads and loads and loads of them, like pretty much all the Shaws, Kung Fu and Wuxia that I could get my hands on. So yeah, I went through a lot over the course of the next sort of like couple of decades after I'd kind of first discovered them. And then we had a drought for maybe about a decade or so until Blu-ray came around, and then in the last couple of years, it's just been heaven for me. It's like Arrow
Yeah.
and Eureka and Shout, and everyone seems to have jumped on the Shaw's bandwagon, which I'm super stoked that they have, because now we're just getting loads of them, almost a couple of months now at this point. Yeah,
It's very cool, and it's like it's almost what you're talking about there. It sort of reminds me, kind of, it's quite kind of punk rock a little bit, and it's a little bit like I obviously come from a big wrestling fan background, so it's a bit like kind of tape trading. You know, a lot of people are kind of dealing with like, so in the 90s and the kind of in the late 80s, kind of tape trading, getting stuff from Japan, you know, like New Japan or All Japan, you know, like FMW, you know, getting your kind of death matches and stuff. So it's interesting, kind of getting like they're always in ropey quality, and now we're, you know, like you say yourself, you know, now we've got these kind of labels coming out, and we've got streaming. You've got your WWE network, you've got, you know, your YouTube now that's showing these kind of scans and stuff. So it's interesting sort of to see that sort of evolution of you know, martial arts films become very sort of mainstream, and like can go now just go into a shop like FOP or in the high street, or you know, or you go to HMV and you can buy
yeah,
Killer
grab my
Meteors,
copy.
or you can buy, you know, the
Totally.
Ebola Syndrome, or you can buy, you know, soon we may be able to buy, you know, like we talked about before in the podcast started, we talked about, you know, Shout Factory, but Shout Studios even back getting the rights to the Hard Boiled, the Killer, and a lot of other kind of Chow Yun Fat movies, and you know, a big wealth of riches coming into that. You know, these films we're never going to get the hands on. But we just kind of joked about before. We're talking about Frank Zheng, and talking about like he was adamant, no, you're never going to see these films ever again, ever on Blu-ray. So shut up, and leave me alone about it. But now, like literally, about a year away from that video you made on your own YouTube to say, now we've got the rights. Now we'll see these films, and
Totally.
in what manner we'll see them, we don't know yet. But I think it's kind of interesting. We're going to see these films come out, and again we'll be able to buy them, you know, just easily from our website, you know, from
Completely.
maybe when FOP, you know, maybe HMV. That seems quite bizarre to me. So it's just interesting. And for me, the cool thing now is doing this podcast, and as I said at the top of the show, learning more about, you know, Hong Kong cinema and Thai cinema and Korean cinema. But and that's all because these like Arrow, Eureka, 88, 101 films to a certain extent are releasing these movies and letting me have this wealth of riches now, and let's get this education. So much like we I say about in the times we are for music and punk rock and hardcore, like I am into, or wrestling, you know, that I'm into as well. We're sort of, I think, at a really good time in 2025 for just content. And if you're a fan of physical media now, and especially of that type, this, you know, martial arts and kung fu movies and Shaw Brothers movies,
You're eating well.
you just get 'em from anywhere. So many different labels now, you know, like Diabolic and, you know, Cauldron, and action movies for me as well, like just ropey, daft Billy Blanks movies I can buy now. Like from Vinegar Syndrome, we just talked about, like, my last episode about Expect No Mercy. Seeing that in Blu-ray is like wild to me, and it's so interesting. We get these amazing Billy Blanks posters, you know, when we buy these box sets. But it's interesting. I think that we're just in a really good time for physical media and for being action movie fans.
I
You know,
completely agree, and I think, I mean, we keep hearing. I mean, for every year, for maybe the last 6 years, we've all been hearing that physical media is dying and streaming's taking over. And I think, yes, there's been a little bit of a decline in terms of the numbers. Like, we're not seeing the sort of sales numbers that we saw in DVD days. But I
yeah,
always describe it as being like, if it is dying, if we're at the end of a really long, if 24-hour day is the cycle of physical media coming out, and we are in the 11th hour, it's a really long extended magic hour, right? So it's that kind of golden glow as the sun sets, and maybe it will kind of wind itself down, but I kind of feel like it's not gonna. I think it's going to keep on going. And there's the way that we saw with vinyl, where vinyl appeared to be dead but has now been resurrected and
oh,
now
well,
been
definitely, yes,
bought
yes,
by
yes.
hipsters for like $60 for, or 60 quid for a vinyl that we used to basically see for £1, right? When we were kids. Like,
Exactly, yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
I
Like,
think the same thing will happen. We'll keep on getting Blu-rays and DVDs for quite a long time to come, I think.
and what you're really saying, John, is that we're hipsters, and I couldn't agree more. Uh, I think it's making so much money now, and there's so many different labels popping up. As I say, we just kind of keep going. It just as long as it has a market, you will always be as long as there's people buying and kind of spending hard cash on these things. I don't think there's ever going to be a real reason for them to kind of disappear, and
No.
it's a cool kind of platform to have because you don't really get them on. You're never really going to see that stuff on Netflix. No, you're not really going to see stuff in maybe Primes. Maybe every so often you get like a ropey Ninja versus Ninja Terminator copy, or
I mean, there was a time when Netflix had a massive chunk of shows for a while. So did Amazon Prime. But once the boutique labels started basically kind of making deals for them to come out on disc, they all disappeared from those platforms. And I think anything that Arrow's released is pretty much on the Arrow player. So if there's any of the Arrow Shawscope box sets,
that's cool.
They're all up on Arrow's player. You can usually sign up for the Arrow player for like free for 7 days or for sometimes a month, depending on which deal you see. Or if you download the app, you can usually get on it for free for a week. And they've still got all the stuff, including all the special features, right? So
that's amazing. That's even cooler. I think that's a good one because you do see these things, and Shawscope box sets are always like, I need to sort of justify it because every time I look, I see it, my girlfriend sees me on the Arrow website, I'm like just sort of pawing the screen like if only, and every so often they just goes a little bit cheaper. I'm just like, right, it will always get to a point when I'm like, it has to get to a point where I'm like, right, okay, I'm all in now. And seeing them in the background of your video, Johnny, I need to it makes me want them even more. It's like the holy grail of like stuff. But like you say, not only Arrow. I mean, I think there's another company just brought some.
Shout's done a few as well. I think Shouts and Shout brought them out thicker and faster than I could keep up with at one point. I was having to sell a bunch of stuff to kind of get a hold of the ones that I did because I think they're just about to release Volume 5 and Volume 6 comes out in March, I think. They had one other box set as well. They had two other. They had Brave Archer and they had a T. Lung David Chang box set. So Shout on their own must be up almost at about 85 Shaw's movies in the last year and a half on Blu-ray, which is nuts, right? And the box sets aren't cheap; they're 120, 130 quid, but for 12 movies, so you're still basically
I mean the math works. Math is mathing, really, isn't it? It's like, but as I say, it's cool. I'm a weird sort of like I'm a bit of a magpie when it comes to things like that. Like I see shiny, and I'm like, right, the Shawscope ones are like just look a bit like they're kind of sexy looking, aren't they? Really, they're just like they do look a bit like a bit cool, like on your shelf. So
they're bugger to find space for because they're quite a weird size. But I kind of dig them in that sort of big book format that they've done. I think they're maybe my favorite release that Arrow's put out. But I'm totally biased, right? I mean, Shaw Brothers is an easy sell for me, and I'll sell my blood if I've no discs to sell to try and get that latest release.
Absolutely. So. Kind of jumping off just that last kind of question there, John. And so when it comes to action movies, well, in 2024, we're of course very much blessed with heroes of all shapes and sizes. So when you think about action cinema, who encompasses the term of action cinema for you? If we look for the kind of dictionary definition of an action star for you,
when I was a kid or now.
I'll take both of them from you if you want to go for ahead. Like I'm happy.
I think when I was a kid. Probably where I kind of started. I think probably Bruce Lee, even though he was quite an inactive action star in a way, where you think of Bruce Lee as being still most of the time, and then this very explosive little fast beat of action, and also kind of good old kind of Sheen Canary, Big Tam. Sean Connery was kind of up there too for me, really, as kind of like sowing those seeds in Indiana Jones. And I think it's hard to kind of pick one single defining guy. I guess for the entirety of my childhood, Arnie was probably the big one, right? I think really because the scale of his movies was so much bigger than anything that I'd seen before in scope and in scale and the age that I was when I was sort of seeing them. So if you held a Conan sword to my neck and made me pick one person, it'd probably have to be Big Arnie because he was like so much larger than life on screen, like physically with his sheer size and sheer scale. And I think he was the sort of comic book character come to life more than maybe anyone else. I think, as there been any other bodybuilders maybe been able to transition so successfully into kind of making movies. And I think made some really good choices too. I mean, I kind of think of him in his Hay and Total Recall and Predator. And so a wee bit too young to see Predator at the cinema, but managed to convince my dad to take me to Predator 2 and Robocop 2. And so at that point in time, you could sneak in kids to 18. So if you wasn't even sneaking them in, if your parent took you the cinema
Yeah.
didn't really say anything. They would just let you go in. It'd be like, well,
Yeah,
parents on board.
it was oddly fine in those sort of days. It's like,
Totally.
this is an 18, but I know he's 10, but it's fine.
That was the
If Dad's
exact.
with you, it's fine. It's absolutely fine.
That was my childhood. So, and I think so. Yeah, Arnie. So I remember Total Recall really vividly seeing that at the cinema and just being absolutely blown away. And my dad knowing without a doubt that I knew it was all not real. Right, I don't think he was ever worried about me running out and trying to invade Mars and liberate a whole bunch of people. None of that was going to happen. The language was always the thing that pissed him off. But I think, sorry, this is a really long, rambly answer to a really simple question.
No,
not
at all.
Arnie would probably be my definitive sort of choice for all time. In recent years, I guess we've kind of got, from the American side, I think Keanu's probably had the longest tenure and managed to kind of have this amazing second wind with the John Wick movies. After kind of really kind of like, obviously Speed and Point Break, and then The Matrix was the one that probably really cemented him as being kind of the new generation of action star.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And as far as Hong Kong side of things go, Donnie Yen's managed to endure in a really admirable.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Obviously with John Wick as well. He was in John Wick 4.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting kind of crossover of your likes really there.
Completely. It was like a marriage, and Mark Dacascos was in there too, and I'm a huge Mark Dacascos fan.
Yeah.
So kind of, and the guys from The Raid. It was kind of really great seeing Yayan and showing up in John Wick 3 as like one of Mark Dacascos's sushi chef assassins, right? And I think the Raid movies in recent memory also kind of way up there. But that's not really a single defining person. And as much as Eco's an immensely talented martial artist, I don't think he's got quite the same gravitas or star power as a Keanu or as an Arnie. So it's hard to kind of find. I guess maybe Ma Dong-suk that from the Korean star Don Lee from.
You've the Roundup movies, yeah.
He's got an incredible presence to him, and I think he's the one that's kind of continuing to kind of really make a franchise out of that series. I think he's announced that he's going to do 10 of them in total. There's going to
be. I'm completely on board with that. Like,
same.
Keep bringing them, because every time I'm like, I just want to watch him like just use absolute big meat hooks into people's faces. And just recently went out for my birthday. I turned 43 a couple of weeks ago. Thanks. We went out for a Chinese meal, a succulent Chinese meal. My sister, his boyfriend, the Chinese, who enjoyed me giving him a shout out to Ken. Oddly enough, we went to a place in Italy in the. I put a picture on my Twitter. You can go and see that. Everybody can go and see the creeps outside. You can go and see that. I went into literally in the sort of the foyer, small foyer of this Chinese restaurant. There was a Better Tomorrow poster with Chow Yun like lighting a cigarette off the burning dollar bill, and Stephen Chow like Fight Back to School. And I've like, how does this happen? Like, I've like just chose this place based on good food alone. I've seen it on Instagram, and now you've got Chow Yun Fat in the window. I can't be more happier.
You made the right choice.
What I was saying about my Chinese meal was, I was telling about like Chow Yun Fat movies, and like I listened to Hard Boiled episode. I was like, well, thanks for watching. Thanks for kiss my ass for a wee bit. Said it was so good. But like I was telling about like this. He's like, who's the guy now that you've? Who's like the big guy, kind of Jackie Chan of like just now? I went, well, it's hard to see anybody other than Don Lee, because he just bars lumps out people, and it's like just ridiculous. It's not like he's not doing like mad mental stunts, but there's just some sort of, there's like a cool presence about him. Like, he just has his like tracksuit tops on. He's a big burly guy. He like literally slaps people, open hand slaps people constantly. There's a bit in the first Roundup movie where he just puts some guy's head on a table and slams the table with his hand, and I thought, that's so horribly violent. but it's all like done. You could laugh at it because it's like so like pantomimically over the top, like battering films at people. And it's the noises he used that the Foley artists in those films. Oh my god, chef's kiss, because like make those punches sound like just somebody's been hit in the face by a ham.
Completely.
It's just so good. So hopefully he becomes like a household name, and again he can make as many Roundup movies or as he likes, because I just think those moves are just so fun and daft, and I can just watch him like be a complete badass for constantly. So hopefully he makes more moves, and hopefully if they ever make another John Wick 5, which I think they've been threatening a little bit, but maybe get him in.
I think it's going to be the Kane movie, right? It's going to be, they're doing a spin-off, so Donnie Yen's getting a crack of the whip. So I think they're talking
That's
about
cool.
Donnie Yen directing it too, so he's going to do a Kane movie, and I could see them reaching out to some
That
other
would be
kind of
cool,
big
yeah,
prominent
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of people, because they brought in a Japanese, really good Japanese actor. You saw Godzilla -1?
No, I've not seen that yet. No,
Oh,
it's one
holy
of my lists.
fuck! Okay, Jesus
I know
Christ!
I'm sorry, but like, apologize.
It's okay. I'll throw my hat in the ring for once you get around to seeing that. If you want me
Yeah,
to come
okay.
back and talk about Godzilla,
Yes.
and one of the actors from Godzilla -1, who's also in the Rurouni Kenshin series, his name escapes me just now, but he crops up as one of the main villains in the third Roundup movie.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
He's kind of like the sort of Japanese Yakuza guy who's sort of sent over to sort the situation out. And he kind of
Yes.
He's kind of completely badass. But yeah, those movies have been really effective, and they've been making some great choice for their kind of villains. But it'd be really interesting to see what happens with the sort of John Wick universe expanding. Because if they do a Kane movie right, I think it's a really good way to go. So I kind of feel like Keanu's story came to a really nice natural end at the end of 4. And I don't know how I feel yet about Ballerina, about not the Korean movie Ballerina, which is awesome, but the Ana de Armas Ballerina, from kind of the John Wick world. I'm hoping it's going to be okay. From last I'd heard, Chad had seen the first cut and immediately pushed them back into reshoots, which he directed himself, which doesn't speak too well to the original director. But it's all right if it makes the movie better. I'm all in for it. So
absolutely. I mean, we also get to see Keanu for be John Wick for like the last time.
Lance Reddick too, right? R.I.P. Lance Reddick. I think Lance Reddick's in it as wee bit too.
Yeah, that's a sad movie, sad thing, because I love that guy. I think he just seemed like just a cool guy, and then for him to kind of pass away, but I think Keanu had like an amazing sort of like kind of kinship with him as well, which is it's kind of cool. We get to see him come out for one last time, and like I like Ana de Armas. I thought she was good in the last kind of Bond movie. I thought she was kind of played her hand quite well there. Like
she's pretty good. Did you see The Grey Man?
I've not seen The Grey Man.
She's the best thing in it.
I do love her. I do like a Netflix action movie.
It's not bad. I've listened to quite a few of the audiobooks of that series. It's a pretty good, fun. I guess Jack Reacher adjacent series, kind of like the Tom Clancy books that your dad used to read when you were a kid. Same sort of vibe, but it's just like those sort of tropey, pulpy, just rinse and repeat storylines each time round, was just with a different point your hero against a different group of bad guys, right? But the Grey Man film's actually not that bad with Ryan Gosling. It's kind of directed by the Russos, I think. And
yeah.
And Chris Evans got a pretty good turn as a really campy, obnoxious, kind of nasty loafer-wearing villain in it. That's quite entertaining.
I like that. I like the Russos. I liked Winter Soldier. I think the stuff they've done with Marvel is really good. I'm interested to see what they do with Marvel coming forward. One day I need to watch it, because I think I always kind of see it on Netflix and go, is now the time for the Grey Man? Is it Grey Man time for me? I don't know, but
hopefully soon.
Yeah, hopefully soon. What I'll do is I'll watch it for you, Johnny, and I'll come back.
Please do watch it for me. And when you see Ana
you've recommended, I'll take your
wearing floral suits, and then think of me, because she's pretty good in it. She's great.
So what we're going to do, Johnny, we're going to move on now to your pick for this episode. So as I always remind the creeps out there, I kind of give my guests my expansive list of action movies and ask them to choose a favourite to come and chat about. And you've chosen a film that I've only very recently should say, come to discover and fall in love with, and that's 1984's The 8 Diagram Pole Fighter. And I mentioned at the top show, you're a sort of scholar of sorts of all things Shaw Brothers. So what made this one stand out on the list for you so prominently?
Well, I mean, first off, your list is phenomenal, so it was very hard to narrow it down. I think you asked me to pick 2, and I gave you 4 because I just couldn't. I couldn't get it down to 2. Just too much awesome stuff on the list. But I was aware of the fact that I don't think you've done a Shaw Brothers movie yet.
No, not yet.
I kind of wanted to start on this one because, in a way, what's that Smashing Pumpkins song? The end is the beginning of the end, right? In a way, we're kind of getting to start. By starting with this one first, you're kind of starting with something that almost closed out the Shaw Brothers studio. Right? It's one of the last real masterpiece movies that they made. It's arguably Lau Kar-leung, the director's masterpiece. So I don't think it's his most enjoyable film to watch. I think Dirty Ho would always take that mantle for me, but I think it's arguably his finest work as a director at shows. If we were kind of speaking about it as sort of the production of it all. So, and also the kind of the salvation of a very troubled production, which we'll kind of get into when we speak about the movie. So there's just a lot going on there, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. I'm super intrigued to know what you made of it, because you're getting to watch it. I'm assuming, did you watch it on Blu-ray?
I watched it on the 88 film Blu-ray, and I also
Right.
watched it on Hi-Ya. Originally seen it on 88 film Blu-ray I got, and then I've got which is the Shaw Brothers kind of classic ones they've got, and then I watched it on Hi-Ya for the rewatch for this episode. So utilised both my little fountains of youth, essentially.
Because you
Knowledge.
would have seen it looking incredibly good. Like, first
Oh
time
yeah,
I saw it,
yeah,
it
absolutely,
looked,
yeah.
I was kind of telling you about the Flash Legs Kung Fu. That was one of the tapes that I got at that Flash Legs Kung Fu pilgrimage. So the first time I saw it, it looked like garbage. When I was before I got into film school, I was kind of like trying to learn how to use video editing equipment, trying to learn how to use like non-linear editing. And the very first thing that I cut together as an exercise to learn how to use editing equipment was I cut the sequence of Gordon Liu fighting against Philip Cole from the end of 8 Diagram Pole Fighter down from like 8.5, 9 minutes down to match cut to Chemical Brothers track, or Dust Brothers.
That's amazing.
And that was the very first thing I cut. So the movie's kind of got a special place in my heart for a whole bunch of different reasons, partly from when I was kind of first exposed to it, but also just thought there's a lot there for us to get our teeth into when we're chatting about it, because it's such a fascinating production. I mean, it's like not that many times. I mean, I know you did your Crow episode we spoke about before we started recording, which I really adored. And that's another instance of a movie becoming almost somehow more than the sum of its parts, because one of the main actors died during the production, right? It kind of gets this sort of weird, slightly tragic, mythic quality to it by the fact that it's someone's last work. And you could argue the same thing happened a wee bit with The Dark Knight after Heath Ledger dying. And that kind of movie, did that elevate? Would people think of it as highly if it hadn't been his last performance? I don't know. There's something there to examine, and I don't think the same thing happened in the case of Invincible Pole Fighter, where it's not a case of Alexander Fu Sheng leading the charge in the movie, because he died way early in production, so they had to basically massively regroup, and it became a sort of different movie after his passing, and for better or for worse. So it's not quite comparable to The Dark Knight or The Crow in that regard, where they were almost finished in both cases. But yeah, there's just a lot there, and I think for your first foray into Shaw's on the podcast, I thought it was kind of a very good, very solid place to start. Whether it might mean that everything pales in comparison, I don't think it will, because there's other movies that I think you'll enjoy for different reasons, maybe more than you enjoy a Diagram Pole Fighter, because it's quite a bleak sit. But I'm really also just fascinated to know what you made of it, if you kind of watched it for the first time pretty recently.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that and a little bit more about, maybe a little bit. I'll go into a little bit more about my sort of history with Shaw Brothers as well. So let's have a little bit about into this movie and its sort of background. So the 8 Diagram Pole Fighter, also called Invincible Pole Fighter, from 1984, starring Gordon Liu, Little Lee, and Alexander Fu Sheng, or Sheng Fu, as some IMDb has it. Directed by the legendary and prolific Chai Lang Lu, or A.K. Lau Kar Lee Ulung.
Can I help you out there? Lau Kar Lung.
This is where Ken could have come in handy. You want to have Ken in my back and go like, no, that's not proper Cantonese. Who gave us 36 Chambers trilogy? Gave us Tiger on the Beat, we discussed earlier in the podcast. Amazing, like Chow Yun Fat movie. Twin Dragons and Drunken Master. Both the sequels, in fact, just not the first one. It could be directed the sequels, obviously, which I think we also discussed about that as well. So you, as yourself, you'd also picked from the list Drunken Master 2, which by the same director, of course. So would you consider a fan of his work and kind of on the whole?
Oh, completely. He's one of my favourite directors, full stop. Not just my favourite Shaw Brothers directors, or I've kind of often argued the point, and sometimes get shot down by people who disagree, but more often than not people agree, that he's kind of in a way Hong Kong's Kurosawa, where he's an absolute master craftsman that a lot of people look on just as being an incredible martial artist, and don't always recognise the fact that he was an amazing director. If you take the martial arts completely out of his movies, there's still a lot going on in the craft of his filmmaking in a way that some of his contemporaries at Shaw's didn't always have. And I think there's a few different sort of house directors at Shaw Brothers who had their own very distinctive styles, but no one that really made the studio their own in quite the same sort of way, or with the same sort of power or impact on me personally, right? Because I think Lau Kar Lung was a very pure-hearted, quite naive, where his whole world was martial arts. So I think his films were always celebrations of martial arts, and particularly the master-student relationship, and they were always kind of had a kind of very righteous moral code to them, but he still had a sense of humor. He was never too po-faced, apart from in the one that we're talking about tonight. Partly because of circumstances, there's almost no comedy in this movie. It's a very somber affair, right? And I think he was just, by this point in time, so like almost to the end of his Shaw's tenure, he knew so well what he was doing in terms of the craft of filmmaking, how he's kind of composing his shots and how he was arranging his editing, and it's just, it's a masterclass in kind of how to direct martial arts cinema, this movie.
And I think that having started to watch the Victor Chambers movies, he does have sort of a, like you say yourself, a kind of relationship with the master student kind of principle, where it's so Gordon, goes through these, finds himself, like in a situation where he needs to go and learn a new technique, or or absolve himself of some sort of sin, or you go and learn this, or avenge his family. Obviously, and maybe talk a little bit of humility in the process. And I think those are interesting. Sort of, there's definitely sort of a kind of through line between this movie and the kind of Fanatical Chambers of Shaolin. It's there's definitely, obviously not just the actors and obviously the director, but also as you see sort of a parallel with the kind of, this is the sort of thing he was into. Then you went to the kind of films like Tiger on the Beat, where it's like just wacky people fighting with chainsaws. Again, Gordon Liu fighting with the chainsaws, and in fact like using a shotgun as a sword, but or making a sort of like a daft sort of film in Twin Dragons, where Jackie Chan's playing off himself, playing like
Twin Dragons. He just cameoed in. So I think he had a small, because without wanting to kind of be that sort of shoegazery pedantic arsehole, but I'm going to be briefly, because Twin Dragons was basically kind of like made for the Hong Kong Stuntman Association, so they kind of like came together. An awful lot of directors cameoed in it, so there's cameos from like a bunch of different Hong Kong directors in the Hong Kong cut. But principally, it's sort of directed by Ringo Lam and Choi Hark, the sort of two main guys who did the lion's share of directing on the film, and then Jackie's stunt team doing most of the action choreography. So Lau Gar Lung's really just there as a small cameo as an actor in Twin Dragons.
Okay.
Drunken Master 2, different story, because that one he definitely directed 3/4 of the movie, and then depending on which story you hear, had a disagreement with Jackie Chan on how to end the film, or went over schedule depending on which story you hear, and so Jackie Chan kind of went and kind of did the final reel of that movie himself, and that became sort of something very different from what Lau Gar Lung had planned. But I think he, as a director, was always quite, I think, a bit lost in his post-Shaw's days, a wee bit. And he got sick, so a lot of people thought he died years before he had actually died. And Sammo Hung brought him back after he'd had treatment for throat cancer, I believe, and brought him back for Pedicab Driver as an actor. He's got this wonderful scene in Sammo Hung's movie Pedicab Driver, where Sammo kind of basically lets him win a fight, which is pretty rare for a movie that someone's directing and starring in, that they basically allow themselves to kind of look and come off wrestling. But it's a sort of a kind of series of, or an example of sort of reverential respect, I think, from Sammo Hung to Lau Gar Lung, because he was a phenomenal filmmaker and martial artist with a direct lineage back to Wong Fei Hung. Like, I think Wong Fei Hung's student, the Magnificent Butcher, which they made a movie about, was the teacher of Lau Gar Lung's father. And so there's a sort of direct line right away from the real life Wong Fei Hung down to the director Lau Gar Lung, and then on to his students, to the people who he trained. So yeah, he was a pretty incredible dude, I think, in front of and behind the camera.
It's almost like, and also you talk about the Sammo thing, it's almost like a kind of a passing of the torch and showing reverence for the guys that have come before you. Because obviously I always feel like, this is obviously just me and my sort of knowledge of my minimal knowledge of the Jackie movies, the Sammo movies, and Shaw Brothers movies, and the kind of whole, that there was sort of a shift a little bit in terms of the style and the sort of because obviously these Shaw Brothers movies are very sort of elaborate, like you said, obviously the sets and so forth are very, like, if you, recently, for my birthday, as I was sulking about nobody wishing me happy birthday, and I bought a cake myself that I ate, and Mrs. Molly's cake, if anybody's from and that Irish brand of in Tesco, that I bought a whole birthday cake, Johnny, to eat to myself, and to eat it myself. I did that, and I just sat. Somebody, I think Shout, put out like on their YouTube a Jackie Chan marathon. I watched all the old Jackie kung fu movies. You know, the ones very sort of very late 70s and into the kind of very early 80s before he kind of became the Jackie we know. You know, the sort of the police story, the character Jackie, I suppose, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, like you say, there's a difference between watching those movies
And watching
where
Shaw's.
it's like every final battle is just like a kind of dusty fields,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of end sort of the same sort of way. You're like, I was like, did I just watch the same movie? Like it seems very like similar, like unless or less, well, apart from Kilometers where it gets blown up by like a weird sort of like again like an interest in the sort of Lead Weapons of China or Eight Diagram Pole Fighter, or they always have like some sort of special weapon.
Mm-hmm.
The one in Kilometers, it just happens to explode Jackie into bits, which is and Jackie's a bad guy, a sort of pantomime sort of eyeliner winged eyeliner bad guy, which is quite cool.
Completely.
But yeah, it's like there's sort of definitely a difference. So it was again that's much like obviously Jackie's showing a little bit of reference to Shaw Brothers, but then going right, go a little bit different. We want to be a little bit different here, and we can move on to other things. And even though there was quite a good glut of like films in the 80s that were sort of in the same sort of kind of pantheon along with Police Story and so forth, there was a difference in Hong Kong, I feel.
Yeah, completely. No, you're right. You're right. I think part of the reason that Shaw's kind of wound down was because I don't think they managed to read the room or read the lay of the land as well as Golden Harvest. And I mean, Golden Harvest started by Raymond Wong, who was a top dog at Shaw's for a long time. So he'd kind of been head producer and line producer, kind of basically the guy looking after the day-to-day for Run Shaw, kind of overseeing the productions and just making sure that the wheels kept on turning. And it was a machine, right? Shaw's was a movie-making machine. So they were churning out 4 or 5 movies a year every year, and all the actors would be generally working on multiple projects at the same time. But Run Shaw was famously, he loved money a lot. And he felt that his love of money should trump the need to pay you royalties if you've acted in one of his movies. They need to really pay you a decent wage if you'd been in movies that were doing really well for him. So I think a few people, some of the key directors, did quite well out of their time at Shaw's, but a lot of the actors really didn't. I think famously Bruce Lee had meetings at Shaw's and they were going to try and get him under contract, and he was already savvy enough to know the way that the American system worked, and he was like, well, you're going to have to give me X amount of money and also a share of the profits. Like if this film does well, I kind of want a little bit of a cut. That's how it goes in today's world. And Shaw's were like, nah, that's not the Shaw's method. Yeah. And so he left and basically kind of helped sow the seeds for the beginning of what would become Golden Harvest. So Golden Harvest very wisely just set up all these little satellite companies. Let Sammo Hung start his own kind of company, and they allowed the kind of filmmakers to work under the banner of Golden Harvest, but they were kind of all working pretty independently on their own little productions. And as they did better, the budgets got bigger, and they would start expanding more into doing contemporary movies. And we'd obviously kind of see films set in the present day at the time, in the kind of 80s and the 90s. Shaw's not really too keen to do that. So they did a couple. There are a few sort of contemporary set, kind of more crime-based thrillers, or kind of more like gang style, closer to what you would think of as being kind of some of the movies that kind of came out of Golden Harvest. But they couldn't really, it was too little too late at that point. So I think they kind of wound down and moved into TV production. And so TVB sort of rose out of the ashes of Shaw Brothers, and TVB still continues to this day and still makes a whole bunch of stuff, but it's pretty much for TV rather than for the mainstream. Did try briefly to come back in the early 2000s and brought back Lau Garung for one last swan song. He made Drunken Monkey in I think maybe 2002 or 2003, which was I think his last feature film for the Shaw studio, and not his greatest, but still no bad. But nothing like the heyday that they had in the 70s and the 80s for me. I think kind of early 70s through to Eight Diagram Pole Fighter was that kind of joyous 12 or 13 year magic period for Shaw Brothers.
It's an interest as well, because we talked a little bit about the Shaw scope, and shouts to those bringing out kind of the box sets and so forth. They just have that's what something I kind of found about Shaw Brothers, which is so interesting. You could watch one Shaw Brothers and go, that's not that great, but then you could go, there's maybe like 15 or 20 films that are amazing. So like you go into these films and go, maybe didn't like that as much, but then you could find so many other films that they're more to your taste and so forth. And
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're a fan of that type of martial arts movies, then I think that, that Shaw Brothers is kind of are sort of the daddies when it comes to that. I mean, I have a big love for Golden Harvest. Golden Harvest is like sort of are my boys, really. Like if we're the Jets and Sharks, I'm definitely Golden Harvest. When it comes to that kind of thing, I'm slowly kind of getting. I can maybe move sides a little bit. I go to the WCW or Shaw Brothers a little bit, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the WWF, maybe even, like, we could even say that about the Shaw Brothers. But I think it's just interesting that they were doing so much, and
not just martial arts, we should point as well. A lot of horror movies, a lot of dramas, a lot of musicals, a lot of like love stories, a lot of everything in between. Occasionally sci-fi, occasionally their own sort of version of tokusatsu. So Super Inframan's very much like a attempt to try
yeah,
and
yeah,
make
yeah.
something that the way that you were seeing in sort of like Kamen Rider or these sort of things in Japan, and even had their stab at doing like a King Kong movie, Mighty Peking Man.
Oh
Just
yes, yeah.
not the greatest, but still good fun, and the effects in it are pretty great, and some of the models are pretty great. So I think that, they made a lot of different types of movie. I think it's just the one that's resonated the most with international audiences, probably the Kung Fu and the Wuxia movies.
It's interesting. There's also that parallel, kind of like the MGM movies, of the sort of like the kind of 30s and 40s and 50s. They were just churning these films out, and maybe they were. You see yourself, like, obviously maybe they weren't treating the actors as well as they could be. They maybe not paying them as much as they could be.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, in some occasions, exploiting them more
Oh
than
yeah.
they really should be at all. So it's interesting. You have like this sort of parallel, even though it's obviously a bit later on in the sort of in the time scale, but in different decades, but the still same kind of mentality of like we're a big kind of conglomerate of like of a movie studio. We're just gonna pump these films out as much as we can. We're gonna fling as much shit at the wall as we can. Some stuff manages to get through, but for every for every Fix of James of Shaolin, there's Mighty Peking Man or
Yeah, oh, completely.
Inframan, or so they're just like, whoa, what's this? Like it's. But I think that's an interesting thing because when throwing shit against the wall, there's always going to be something that maybe isn't as a bit ropey, but it also becomes this sort of like this kind of classic thing. For every sort of like Ray Harryhausen movie, for instance, for every Clash of Titans, there's going to be like Quango or something like.
Aye.
So these not as great lot of like creature features, but there's always going to be something interesting along the sort of that sort of way, and they will invariably like trip over and make a classic. So I think it's kind of interesting, and that's something I'm enjoying finding out about as I kind of mosey along the Shaw Brothers Road a little bit, and I think
Mm.
that's kind of partially to finding out, watching your reviews and watching kind of Will Gish and stuff like that as well, and Hong Kong Appreciation Society. I think it's just find out more and more about it, and this is again, this conversation with you is lighting my fire about finding a bit more about martial arts movies. So we're going to jump in a little bit about and give the creeps at home a little bit of back to the VHS synopsis of 8 Diagram Bullfighter.
Mm-hmm.
So the 7 sons of the Wu Lang family face up against an invading horde of Mongols in the Battle of Janisha, but are betrayed by a trusted insider, leading to all but 2 sons escaping with their lives. As one brother is slowly driven to despair, the other forges a path to learn the ways of Shaolin and become the 8 Diagram Bullfighter.
Hell yes.
So, Johnny, what did you make of your rewatch? Probably your thousandth rewatch of this movie.
I think it's maybe not quite as much as that, but I think we're probably into like 30th or 40th for me now.
Wow. Okay.
It's kind of like a familiar old friend at this point, one that I maybe don't watch it or don't revisit as much as I do some other of Lau Garlong's movies, but because you kind of got to be in the right sort of headspace for it, because it's pretty bleak in places. Like it's a kind of tough set in places, partly because I think I know the real story, and you can kind of see it particularly through Gordon Liu's performance. Like, because Gordon Liu, generally a very affable, quite really endearing and charming actor on screen, but even when he was in films where he was fighting for his life, he was always there's quite a light-hearted element to him in 36 Chambers of Shaolin, and certainly in Dirty Ho he always had a kind of wry smile and an annoying wink, and there's none of that here. And I think that there's a lot of tears, and I think a lot of them were real because of what they were going through with having lost Fu Sheng.
Yeah.
And so I think the movie changed and evolved after Fu Sheng's passing. And I know that Caraway's part got bumped up considerably, the eighth sister. So her involvement in the last reel of the movie, I think, arguably was probably meant to be Fu Sheng originally. So he was meant
yes.
to come to his senses eventually and kind of get over his PTSD and join forces with his brother who'd been training at the temple, and then go and seek revenge against the people that slayed his family. So we kind of got a very different version of events in the cut of the film that we do now have, but it's one that I think still really holds up, and I think it for something that is quite dark in tone and very different to Lau Garlung's other movies, because it is so much darker in tone, I think that gives it an extra sense of gravitas that maybe some of his more light-hearted stuff doesn't have. So I think it's always one that I think even people who are not super into Lau Garlung's more sort of jokey fare, because he kind of kicked off the kung fu comedy at the other end of his career, like at the very beginning in 1975. His first movie as director was Spiritual Boxer, and that is very much a kind of proto what we would see Jackie and Samo kind of picking up the torch with and really running with and pushing further into kind of the comedy territory. But he kind of really was dabbling with that, and he did always have quite a lot of jokes and quite a lot of gags in his movie. And there's just none of that in this, and I kind of like that there's one real dark, brooding entry in his filmography, and it's this one. And some of the action sequences just so unbelievably good. And I think if you held a Conan sword to my throat before, if you're holding a Yang family staff, a Yang family spear or maybe a bit of bamboo that you're threatening to like run through me and shatter, get up against me and tell me to pick one single favorite Shaw Brothers fight scene out of them all that I would sort of describe as being my favorite, it's the battle between the end. Before he's allowed to leave the temple, when he fights against Philip Ko-Fei to kind of prove his mastery, when they end up drawing the 8-diagram Taoist symbol with pillows and candlesticks on the ground, which is just phenomenally well staged and so beautifully shot. And I think Philip Ko-Fei's never been better than he was kind of going up against Gordon Liu in this movie. And I love Philip Ko-Fei from a whole bunch of his own movies, because he went on to direct a whole bunch of films himself, often very low budget, Billy Blank style budget levels in Hong Kong years later, some of which are absolutely fantastic. Giving the man from Holland a shout out at this point, because that's a great movie that he directed. It's just utterly bonkers. But yeah, the fight against the two of them, so the abbot of the temple and Gordon Liu, almost rivals the end fight of this film, which in itself is totally spectacular, this sort of stacked tier of coffins that they're kind of using in just the maddest ways, of people popping out of them, and Gordon Liu rocking up with an enormous, huge cart full of about 500 bamboo poles that he kind of uses to go up against them. So there's a brutality to it that you rarely saw in Lau Garlung's movies. A lot more blood than we normally see. And although he didn't really like to kill people that much in movies, he's kind of like the Kung Fu Batman, Lau Garlung. He'd beat the shit out of you, but he kind of wanted you to live long enough to learn the lesson of why he beat the shit out of you.
Like, I'm doing this for your own good.
Aye, exactly. And so in this case, it's ripping your teeth out, which is arguably worse.
Oh, wow, there's a lot of like stuff like that, like
defang the wolves.
Exactly. Do you know what? I've actually only just realised that's what's the whole point of it. Like at that point, because there is a bit where there's people, there's bad guys. They kind of the Mongols of the piece are they've getting there's two guys and they get held with this bamboo over in their mouths. And when the guy takes like one of the monks takes out the bamboo, their teeth are like stuck like comedy, like Bugs Bunny style into the bamboo. And one get headbutts and he's got all the teeth in the guy's head. It's like properly graphic, but it's like sort of almost comedic, but at the same time, because you think it's so gory and so crazy, like you're not usually used to those things, and kind of you do see the kind of the sort of very very red sort of like paint style sort of giallo style blood, but there's they're spitting up crayons, Crayola colors. Yeah, like do you think that's maybe the reason why kind of it does stick out and is showing us a lot of reverence, because it's coming? As I said before, obviously with Jackie movies become more prevalent, and the Going Harmless movies kind of gone into a bit more of a I wouldn't say realistic concepts, but less sort of fantasy, less sort of period pieces, and obviously they're a bit more period pieces of the time in the 80s are a bit more like grounded in sort of the culture of the time in Hong Kong of the time. Do you think this is the reason why this kind of sticks out? Is because it's a little bit more gritty, a little bit more hard, a little bit more kind of calloused, a little bit more kind of gory. Do you think that maybe that's the reason why this is one that sticks out for quite a lot of kind of Shaw Brothers fans, is something different, and not just Shaw Brothers fans, but martial arts fans, that they can watch this because it's a little bit more.
In retrospect,
Yeah.
yes. At the time, it was a kind of a financial failure. Like, it didn't do well at all when it came out. A lot of people didn't want to see it because it was Fu Sheng's last movie, and Fu Sheng was this very beloved kind of star in. He was kind of like he was married to a really successful actress singer in Hong Kong, so they were almost like the Brangelina of their day, I guess. So they were the darlings of the press, and everyone was kind of keeping up with what Fu Sheng and his wife Jenny, I can't remember her surname, but because she was mostly just known as Jenny, she was like in a Madonna way, she just had one name. So like the Fu Sheng and Jenny relationship was something that was in the newspapers all the time, and they were kind of really sort of darlings of Hong Kong at that point. So that there was I think a really massive sense of mourning for the city as a whole after he passed. And I think the film suffered a lot from that financially, so partly contributing to Shaw's decision to kind of wind down movie production was because he'd sort of thrown everything into this and it really didn't work that well. And I think there was another movie that he'd shot, that Lau Kar-leung had made with Fu Sheng, that came out after this, called Cat v Rat, which didn't do very well either. It's much more of a sort of even more Looney Tunes Roadrunner style comedy that's bonkers, that if you ever get a chance to see, I think you'll actually really enjoy for very different reasons. But no, I think in retrospect, it's kind of like that sort of Blade Runner effect, where at the time that it came out, people didn't really engage with it that much, and critics in Blade Runner's case were really pretty set against trashing it. Don't know if it's true to say that the Hong Kong critics necessarily trashed this movie when it came out, but it certainly didn't do well financially, which was very unusual for Lau Kar-leung and Lau Kar-leung at Shaw's, because some of his movies were some of the ones that made the most money for the studio, particularly the 36 Chamber of Shaolin was phenomenally successful. Were kind of one of the kind of few of their movies that made it to a trilogy, so they kind of made two more off the back of it. And I think in the studio's eyes, I'm sure that this was an attempt to kind of try, sort of, for lightning to hopefully strike twice and for them to recapture the glory of 36 Chambers of Shaolin, but events transpired to make a very different movie, and it was released to very different circumstances. So I think for international fans, I think it's held in this incredible sort of high esteem. And I think for some of the people involved in it, like from the interviews that I've seen with Gordon Liu, with Cara Wei, and with Rita Young, who plays the other sister, they've all kind of speak very, very highly of it as being kind of maybe some of the best work that they kind of did, or kind of way up there for them in terms of the kind of end result of film. But I think one of the more difficult productions for all of them working on. So it's a really weird one. I think I do think probably, yes, its tone contributes a lot to how Western fans have kind of embraced it. But a lot of it is in retrospect. I think we probably felt very different about it if we'd been living in Hong Kong in '84 and seen it when it came out. I think it would maybe... It's weird when you go back to Hong Kong now. It's almost impossible to find the Shaw Brothers movies anywhere. And you visit the studio and it's just this, basically a front gate, and it's a shell. And there's almost this kind of like, the city's moved on. They don't really remember the way that international fans do, or don't have the same sort of like reverential respect for the studio and for the films that they made. I think it's kind of a bit of a shame. Hong Kong's never been that good about celebrating its own sort of film history. Everything's quite disposable, and a bit like if you've ever been to Las Vegas, where if you go 2 years apart, the cityscape's changed because they rip buildings down so fast and build new ones. And Hong Kong's a little bit like that, where they're always moving forward at an incredible breakneck pace and don't often look backwards.
I think it's a lot about a lot of things now that cinema is it's all about evolution, and obviously we're in that age where we're talking about AI, we're talking about actions at a different level now, which is a good thing. Like I talk a lot about, I'm a soy boy lefty, grungy little boy that I talk about when I talk about these movies. Because they talked about For Justice, and talked about Stallone, sticking up for Trump, and you've got kind of Scott Adkins. I thought it was going to be leading light, and he's saying that Trump's really cool, and Arnie's sort of like turned the corner a little bit. With Arnie's in a good place politically, and he seems a bit switched on and quite woke Arnie. That's interesting. I think that's kind of cool thing, and he's getting older. I think he realizes that I'm getting a bit older. I'm not, Arnold anymore. I'm Arnold. I'm kind of getting a bit older. I've got a pig's heart.
and
I'm kind
also,
of like I'm a bit more chilled out now, like,
and
and
he's
I
a
want to be a bit more focused
and
on like
he's a Kennedy now too, right? He married into the
yeah, oh yeah,
Kennedys. So.
exactly, yeah, Maria Shriver. But it's interesting to see what I always say with this podcast is that yes, I love Arnie, I love Stallone, I love Seagal, I love those movies, but at the same time, you know, we have to evolve, we have to move in as action movie fans and be like, some of the stuff is ropey, like I spoke very, very early on, like in the very first episode about Running Man and how, there's a lot of films that are very jingoistic,
Mhm.
it's always like the superpower that was involved, whether it be, with Stallone, it was very much, when it was Rambo, it was like, the Vietnamese, it was the
Mhm.
Russians, it was the Saudis, it was, when Rocky, it was the Russians and fighting Dolph Lundgren.
Which is the one when he
It's
joins up with the Taliban? Was that Rambo 3?
that's Rambo Part 3. Yeah. That's I mean, which is quite cool. They play some sort of weird like horse polo thing with him, which is quite interesting. But yeah, like I mean, look at it now, like in the sort of in the sort of late 80s and the 90s, he was like hanging about the Taliban, and like 10 years later, you couldn't say the word Taliban without somebody jumping on your back and saying, "What the fuck are you talking about them for?" And so reverence, but like Rango hung out with them and it's fine. He says they're fine, Rambo, Big Stallone, but we have to evolve, and I think that's possibly what Hong Kong and Japan as well, and action movies just have to move on, and I don't think you can make like I'm going to expose something a little bit of myself in terms when it comes to kind of I'm not really a big fan of the wuxia movies in terms of like the sort of very CGI guys fighting dragons, and the wirework stuff for me is begins and sort of ends with Zoo Warriors. That was
Okay.
like
See,
my thing. I love that
see,
movie. Just
that's
is.
already too much wire work for me.
But that is like that's the fantastical stuff that I'm not
Yeah.
really as much, and I like the kind of the grounded stuff. So
I think you would like older wuxia movie because there's like the more recent the Shawscope Volume 3 set that came out just last Christmas. That's like a departure away from kind of like traditional martial arts movies, and
mm,
that's a better example of kind of some of the classic Shaw's era wuxia movies, because they've been making those stories for a long time, and we would have grown up on Monkey and the Water Margin, right?
oh yeah,
On
definitely, yeah. I mean,
And I
like that
think
was
there's a lot of, because like although that Monkey Show was Japanese, it was based on Journey to the West, which is a kind of
mm,
Chinese novel, and so that whole story and everything in that story is all, I think of as being kind of really a wuxia story, right? It's that Monkey's kind of like proto wuxia story in a way, like
yeah,
in Journey to the West.
definitely, yeah.
And there's a lot of really much more, if you can say grounded, there's much more grounded examples of the wuxia genre on Shawscope Volume 3. Like The Magic Blade's a phenomenal movie, and there is bits of wire work in it, and there's bits of the fantastical, but it doesn't get as insane as it did when everything got hyper sped up and people were like battling back and forth on wires or spinning
Yeah.
around like a bajillion times before they land, and it all got a little bit too, the effects couldn't quite keep up with what they were doing, and I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I recently watched the Sword. I
Yeah,
imagine
the Patrick
you're
Tam
a fan
movie.
of
Ah,
that,
yeah.
and that like that end fight scene is quite a lot of that. But I love that movie, and it
Mm-hmm.
ends graphically violence. Like it comes out of nowhere, and you're like, oh whoa, what the fuck? Like it just kind of ends in the sort of way you go, did that just actually happen? Like I've never seen an ending like that in a martial arts film ever. I don't think it was so like. It's just because like one minute they're flying all over the place, literally like kind of wirework stuff, and then like spinning around with the sword like this, like the crouch, the kind of things, obviously the crouching tiger kind of stuff that
Mm-hmm.
is the most famous example of that, I suppose. But
And you
yeah,
could argue one of the best films in terms of that.
oh,
That's
of course,
very
yeah,
beautifully
absolutely.
done.
And again, that's another film that I have a lot of love for. Again, it's like Chow Yun Fat, like Michelle Yeoh, like. I don't. If you put those two people in a movie, I don't think I can really like not love that, not be an absolute love for it. And it's obviously a very beautiful and like sad and emotional movie, and the
Mm-hmm.
fights in it are just absolutely insane. But yeah, I'm just not a big fan of like those ones I like, and I like some of the kind of ones that upon a time in China,
Mm-hmm.
some of the Jet Li one movies that I really like those ones. But I'm just not a fan of the. There's a lot of like ones in Haya where I just can't watch it because I don't want to see a man fight a giant tiger. I don't know why. I don't know. Like a giant CGI tiger. I'm just like, and it's always like, not to shit on fucking Hong Kong cinema, but
No,
those
and
kind of films. More,
I think it's
I
like
think,
they're quite different
because of
things. So.
my mentality is so grounded in this sort of like this little box I've put myself in, and I will watch, the kind of the newer Donnie Yen stuff. I'm really excited about the prosecutor, isn't it? That's what it's called, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Roaring Fire, Raging Fire is
Raging
Raging
Fire.
Fire.
Yeah.
Raging Fire, the sequel to that will be pretty cool, and I think we're getting Flashpoint too. I think.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that as well. So that'll be kind of cool because I loved that in fight scene with Donnie and that Flashpoint is absolutely ridiculous. It's so like it's one of my favorite fight scenes ever. But I digress. But
Did you ever, just
um,
before we jump off Donnie Yen, did you ever see Wuxia, aka Dragon, that he made in maybe about 2012 or 2013? That is, I mean, the clues in the title where it is definitely playing off some of the tropes of wuxia movies, where it's kind of his version of a one-armed swordsman in a way.
all right, okay, I've never come across that. No.
And it's an incredible movie, but a lot more grounded, where it's kind of presented a lot more as almost like a detective procedural, where there's a kind of detective's coming into an area and he's trying to work out what's happened. And so a lot of the fights you see two versions of. You see like Donnie Yen's attempt to try and explain what happened, and then over time the detective will work out what actually happened. You'll see sort of two versions of the same fight. One that's this sort of very still realistic, but very like paints Donnie Yen in a better looking light than the reality of what's happened, where he's just killed some people really quickly. But that's an amazing movie, and stars one of the actresses from 8 Diagram Pole Fighter Carway's got a part in that, as does Jimmy Wang Yu. If you can get a chance to see Dragon, aka
I'm writing those
Wuxia,
sessions down. I'm like just like this.
Oh, you can message me on Twitter, and I'll send you a homework list anytime you like.
So we're gonna before we discuss our heroic star of this episode, it's time to check in some other stars as we chat about the big five. So, John, the big five is where I chat about the big action stars of this era and see what they are putting out into the world in the 1984. So, Arnold, it's a massive year for Arnold. We had Conan Destroyer and the Terminator. Truly, this is the beginning of the meteoric rise of Schwarzenegger. This is where he starts like going, right, I'm the guy now. I am Arnold. This is, beginning of obviously the rise of Schwarzenegger, the rise of, and he goes into obviously the Commando, etc. He's kind of come off, the Conan Destroyer, with Grace Jones, which again, people seem to think it's an inferior sequel, but no. Any film with Grace Jones in it and Arnie in it is okay with me. Stallone, still in 1984. He's made his classic First Blood in 1982. He's tried his hand at directing again for Staying Alive, which is a sequel to Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah.
A very sweaty movie, less BGs, more Frank Stallone, more of getting. Come on, Frank, you're going to go do the soundtrack for this. And now, Far From Over is an amazing song. Frank Stallone is not a great person, but again, another Trumpist, unfortunately. But a chanteuse, if there ever was one. So he says to himself, Stallone, let me try some singing with Dolly Parton, and we get the film Rhinestone. I don't know if you ever come across this film before. It's very ropey and like I think he plays like Dolly Parton's manager, but he does singing it. I'm pretty sure, and it's it's not a great one. But
I think she wrote a lot of the songs that he ended up singing with her, didn't she?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's. But I mean, if you're a big Dolly fan and you're a big Sly Stallone fan, I don't think you can really go wrong with watching it. But there is, as we discussed, previously in other episodes, much like Rocky, Stallone loves to take a swing. Sometimes swings for the fences, and sometimes he just doesn't get that knockout blow.
That's true.
Other boxing similes. Jackie, we get him popping up in Pom Pom and with Cannonball Run 2. Which is, I think it's the first time I came across Jackie very, very early on, because I was a big fan of Cannonball Run movies.
Same. And I'm sure Wheels on Meals is the same year.
Yeah, again, we're just about to say, yeah, most importantly, we get Wheels on Meals. A film possibly my favourite Jackie fight scene with Benny the Jet, the one in the sort of
castle,
in the castle in the dining room.
Yeah.
What a fight scene! Let's stop for a second to talk about this. So
maybe
soundtrack,
one of top 2 Jackie fights when you ask me.
I would say so. Yeah, I would say so. Like it's such an amazing fight. It's because like him. I've noticed not seen this movie Wheels and Wheels. It's about 40 years last year. In fact,
Mm.
him and Bene Gesserit have sort of a training. It's like treated as a training match. And I think you need to watch the American version because the American version's got this ding ding. It's this proper like montage music that kicks in, but it's just Jackie like proper lean looks so good. And this is like where I'm going to objectify Jackie Chan for a second. He
Quite
just
right.
he's very young and very sort of like wiry,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like it's very fast and fluid. And there's obviously Benny Jet being obviously like, a Taekwondo master and a kickboxing champion. He's like properly like. I think I prefer it. Definitely prefer it to the Dragons Forever fight,
Mm-hmm.
which I think gets more reverence. I think sometimes over people. I think they
Sometimes
seem
I
to, seem
see
to
it going
prefer
back
that a
and
little bit
forth.
more.
Aye.
But no, I think it's kind of young wiry Jackie, just getting sweaty in a sort of like lovely sort of vest top and gloves, fingerless gloves, and sort of throws down this fight scene. But I think it's probably one of the best fight scenes I've seen
I
ever.
think it's the
really.
better movie over Dragons Forever. Dragons Forever's got a really weird
Yeah,
tone
I
to it.
think
He
so.
plays kind of a dick for most of the movie. He plays a lawyer, right? And
Yeah,
it's hard to get behind a lawyer. And Yun Biao in that movie is kind of like a mental patient who's been taken advantage of by everyone around him, and Sammo Hung's a weapons dealer. It's like the three of them are not, because I think all of them tried to like go against type. They're like, okay, we don't want to do the same thing again. Whereas Wheels on Meals is just this sheer joy of like they're just a couple of guys making money in a food truck in Barcelona.
Yes, it's kind of like it's quite a kind of it's a bit of a romp. It's an interesting it's a comedy with obviously amazing fight scenes. It just happens to be like a sort of. I always feel like it feels like a very non-Hong Kong movie.
Mm-hmm.
It feels very like a kind of Italian sort of French sort of like I don't know what would you always say like a Jack Tati movie sort of
Kind
very
of.
sort
Well,
of
I
like
think
very sort of like campy and silly but then it has these like these amazing fight scenes and amazing sort of choreography and Jackie and Ewan Bauer are just amazing as sort of these brothers that own this little sort of like amazingly high
high
tech
tech.
little van. So it's really
Totally.
cool. Like
Because I think we briefly mentioned like Drunken Master and Snake and the Eagle Shadow before. I think those movies were so successful and so popular in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong had a wealth of at that point independent producers who would just basically get wind of what you were doing and like rush out to that dusty field and make their own version. It's why you feel like so many of those films feel the same, because they were just blatant attempts to cash in. So there was a bunch of different versions of Drunken Master. There was Drunken Everything. There was like Drunken Dance the Drunk Mantis, and they would try and sometimes get in some of the original cast from Jackie's movie, but it was all an attempt to try and cash in on the success of Jackie. And Jackie in his own way started as a bit of a Bruce clone too. They were sort of selling him as the next Bruce Lee for a while. So anyway, I digress. But I think as an attempt to try and do something that people couldn't easily copy, they thought, okay, we need to get out of Hong Kong. We've got to go make a movie somewhere else so that people can't get wind of what we're doing. So they kind of went across to Spain and kind of shot on location for the most part, on location in Barcelona, which gives it this really weird feel because you're not in Hong Kong, you're in Barcelona,
it's really
which is a
cool.
really different city, right? And it works really well for that movie. It's a joy. It's an absolute joy.
Yeah, it feels like that sort of like when they take these kind of characters and these kind of actors and put them in sort of like different countries. It just feels more like Armor God feels like a proper like Indiana Jones movie. Like it just
Totally.
feels like that. You could transport these things and just take away from the streets of Hong Kong and put them into these different outlets. I think it's really interesting. I think and it gives them a different feel and different sort of vibe to them, and that's kind of a cooler thing about Jackie that he has made these movies that are a bit different and they're off the beaten path and they're not just like running around Hong Kong like shooting each other or like falling through like factories.
Totally.
I think it's kind of cool.
So Bruce set the tone for that in a way. Like I think Bruce Lee had tried to do the same sort of thing with Way of the Dragon. Like when he had to direct for the first time himself, he was like, I can't do that. Can't do this here, right? So he kind of went away. I mean, his first film was in Thailand, but when he finally kind of got a chance to direct himself in a movie, went across and shot in Italy so they could have that incredible battle in the Colosseum and stuff. And it kind of gave that movie a really different energy and a different feel.
I agree. Yeah, that's
And it's
the
sort
same
of the
sort of vibe.
outsider
Yeah.
too, right? It kind of made your hero really easy to empathize with because they're sort of the outsider in a strange land, and that's always really interesting, particularly for us as Westerners watching these movies because we're in a way the outsider to their culture. So I think it makes those, particularly when they come to European places, because they all feel more familiar for our sort of sensibilities. It's a lot easier to kind of understand a little bit the culture in Italy or the culture in Spain for us than it is sometimes to understand what's going on in Hong Kong, which is a confusing, wonderful, weird, insane place. Even now, God knows what it was like in the 70s and 80s. I never got a chance to visit that early, but it's an amazing city, but one that I'm very aware that I'm a Guaylo in any time that I
Yes,
go.
exactly. Yeah. And at one point, we're both Guaylos talking about like Hong Kong movies and
Mhm.
the interest of Hong Kong and the machinations of Shaw Brothers, but we're two white guys from Scotland that's
But that in
got a
itself is a beautiful thing. Because God, if we
Uh,
were talking about Scottish films, all we'd have is Trainspotting and Restless Natives. It'd be a really
Yeah.
short podcast.
I mean, but we did get Jet Li. He came over. He did a film like that's and with Bob
That's
Hoskins
true.
of
Yeah.
Glasgow, and you can actually walk about and go. Jet Li was like fighting in that place, though.
Fighting Scott
It's
Adkins, no less.
that's genuinely bananas to me. Like, I look at that, I watch a movie so often. I go, "What the fuck? How did that?
How did that
How
happen?
did that happen?"
And directed by a Frenchman.
Yeah, like that. It makes no sense, but somehow it works, and it just again, it's
My
like
favourite one of his non kind of Hong Kong or non-Chinese movies.
yeah,
Actually,
it's a cool movie.
a
Like, and
great soundtrack too by Massive Attack. And
I don't know if you've ever seen of you're a fan of Mark Dacascos,
Hmm.
Brotherhood of the Wolf.
Oh God, yeah.
So every so often, there's in action movies, especially, you get like just a weird sort of like chemical concoction, like people just putting stuff in jars, like in lab coats, going like, let's put anything in and just we'll make a French period piece, but it's got Mark Dacascos and he's like a fucking
With
capoeira and fucking kung fu master. But
with all the choreography done by a Shaw Brothers actor, done by one of the Venom mob, right?
really, is that right? Is that right? I fucking
yeah.
hell, that's
It's Philip
see,
Kwok.
it just
A
makes no
guy
sense.
who's when you watched Hard Boiled, the guy Mad Dog, the guy with the eye patch.
Yes.
That's Philip Kwok. He's one of the Venom mob in Five Deadly
Oh
Venoms, and
wow.
it's him that did all the
Wow.
choreography for Brotherhood of the Wolf. He was my very first interview for my YouTube channel, was Mark Dacascos. When that came out on 4K, I was like, I'm sure one of your other guests had that chance too, because I'm getting deja vu from someone else telling you this story. But I was also lucky enough to get a chance to sit down with the wonderful and incredibly charming Mark Dacascos to speak about Brotherhood of the Wolf. So it was one of the first times I ever got in front of the camera for my YouTube channel, was to sit down super nervous and chat about Brotherhood of the Wolf with Mark Dacascos.
Yeah, I
It's a
think
great movie.
Kat Hughes, when we was talking to
Yes, that
Clive,
was
talked
good.
about that. She
Yeah.
talked about Mark Dacascos and said he was like
That's right, you did.
generally she's a lovely guy and like just a very. And it just seems like I talked to quite a lot at length about the DVD, the Blu-ray extras of that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, 88 Films released that as well, and like
Yeah.
he just seemed like generally the nicest dude.
He was
Like you
very
watch him on
sweet.
Iron Chef, and and he just seems like kind of a very sort of silly and sort of fun-loving and sort of like chill guy. And every so often he's like, you see him on Instagram, he's like just properly in Hawaii, just being like chilled out and like being, hey, I hope you have a good day. And I'm like, yeah, I hope you have a good day, Mark Dacascos.
I'll send you a
No,
link if I can find it. I'll send you a link because he made
okay.
this amazing documentary, I think for the History Channel, where he recounted the footsteps of Miyamoto Musashi, who is this sort of legendary, incredible samurai in Japan who'd, I think, had his first sword fight aged 12 against a grown man, and he only had a wooden sword and he won. And he went on to like become one of the most celebrated, incredible samurai sword wielding samurai. Don't know how best to describe that in Japanese kind of culture. And so there's loads of like statues and kind of, he's a very sort of revered figure in Japanese history. And he wrote this amazing book about kind of war and being a samurai and the samurai lifestyle called the Book of Five Rings. And so like Dacascos made this documentary where he's like reading from the book and sort of walking in his footsteps, and he goes to meet like a sort of a couple of guys who are teaching samurai sword skills and goes to see a sword being made. And it's just a really great little documentary. It's about an hour and 20 minutes long, but he's just like the perfect host to take you on this journey. And for a while it was quite hard to find, but I'm sure I found it on YouTube in the end, so I'll fire you over a link. It's a great watch for a Sunday afternoon.
I'd be just really interesting. I think he does seem like quite a scholar. And I think, as I spoke about on the Drive episode, he's a massive Jackie fan. He was like,
Mm-hmm.
anything I wanted to do in martial arts, like I want to be Jackie.
Mm-hmm.
I hurt myself so badly because Jackie, because I thought it was fucking Jackie and just jump off things and like hit my head in the ceiling. I'm concussed, and I think he's like I got to meet Jackie and he's like so cool. I'm like, fucking Mark Dacascos, you're such a legend. Anyway, so let's moving on. So moving on to Jean-Claude Van Damme. Now Jean-Claude, isn't quite hitting the leaderboard yet. He had an uncredited soldier role in the Chuck Norris vehicle Missing in Action. And if I just check my notes here, yes, he's also Gay Karate Man in Monaco Forever, which seems to be some sort of weird Belgian French sex comedy.
Amazing.
All I can say is
One
his
that I have
clips
not
of him
seen.
like getting felt up in a Jaguar, open top Jaguar by a foppish Frenchman. I don't know much about it. It looks very silly, but then he does some kung fu in it and some martial arts. So
Because what came first? Was it his attempt to try and be in Predator come before No Retreat, No Surrender, or were they about the same time? Was that both 86?
I
Maybe it
think
was.
I think he was obviously in Predator first of all, I think,
Mm.
and then he was also in Breaking 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Oh no, I didn't know he was in that.
He
I
was
remember
in
him first
the
from No
crowd
Retreat,
scene.
No
So
Surrender.
I think it just claps in a leotard. I think that's real. Just like he's like, "I want to do." I was like, just clap in a leotard in the background as somebody does like like dances to like Grandmaster Flash, and somebody obviously dances with a mop at some point as well, or a brush. I think. I've not seen. I have very little knowledge about Electric to
I don't
Boogaloo,
remember
but
much about Electric Boogaloo
yeah,
2.
and obviously Seagal.
Mm.
He's probably lying to someone somewhere.
I suspect so. Oh,
Who
he's
was good
looking
at martial arts.
is possibly looking very slim at that point still.
Yeah, very very slim, not like the man he is now, the
Mm-hmm.
Russian oligarch,
The Man
lovely
Mountain.
man he is
Yeah.
now, sitting in a chair just talking shit and talking about alligator ass and punani. So, speaking of number 5,
Mm.
let's get into discussing the fifth brother, Yan Wulang, player of legendary Gordon Liu.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you make of him as a kung fu martial arts star? We just talked about Jackie quite a lot there, and obviously Samo, and a little bit more about obviously the Zorbirds guys in the whole. Again, we talked about Jackie at this time kind of forging a new path of martial arts in Hong Kong. So, what makes Gordon still so iconic in this time and indeed now?
I think, I mean, in this film, we maybe kind of see one of his most dramatic acting performances, as well as some of his kind of best martial arts performances. But some of the scenes in this, particularly when he goes into the temple and sort of forces his way into becoming a monk, which couldn't be more different than how he ends up becoming a monk in 36 Chamber, where he's so fresh faced and so kind of like good spirited in 36 Chamber, and really here he's the very antithesis of what you would expect a monk to be. He's just still all about killing, all about revenge, and every single monk in the temple can see it, right? They're like, no, this isn't not going to work. Like, you still kind of basically you're not going to read the scriptures, you can't do this, you've still got too much hatred in your heart. And he's like, I'll burn the fucking temple down if you don't let me become a monk and learn the ways of peace, which is like pretty mental when kind of with the fact that he doesn't get thrown out. But I think they do ultimately kind of weirdly learn a little bit from him too over the course of the movie, and so by the end of it they do recognize there is a time when you've got to sort of defend your home from the wolves, though those wolves might not be actual wolves, they might be invaders, they might be I can't remember which version of the subtitles you'll have seen on that 80 version, they maybe called them the Tartars, but the kind of the group ultimately that he goes to get revenge against are kind of like the invaders from the north, and the monks ultimately do end up kind of coming to his aid and literally defying the wolves, as we said earlier. But yeah, it's such a different tone of performance from what we're used to in the other movies that he made for Lau Lung, when he was always just this really quite light-hearted, very charismatic hero. And I think very fresh-faced in 36 Chamber, really suavely debonair in Dirty Ho. And I don't know if, I hope you've seen Dirty Ho, because he's like doesn't really do as much action in Dirty Ho. He does some, but it's all in a very Fred Astaire way, disguised fighting. So it's more like dance choreography than it is like traditional kung fu in that movie. And that's a chance for him to flex his comedy chops. But I think he was a really versatile, great actor. I think he's maybe one of the better actors from Lau Lung's troupe. Certainly there were some other really good dramatic actors at Shaw Brothers, but from Lau Lung's sort of school of kind of actors who we'd regularly use, I think Gordon Liu was the one really that was probably the most versatile and the most charismatic on screen, and no one's ever looked better bald than Gordon Liu in the history of cinema. I think he's kind of up there with Yul Brynner as like really being able to pull that off a lot of years before Vin Diesel tried to cash in on this game, or Jason Statham tried to cash in on the bald game. Jason Statham's maybe actually kind of taking that mantle and flying it, because he still looks pretty damn good, as I'll state him. But
does,
Gordon
yeah.
looked amazing. But it was great when they kind of gave him hair for him to then take off in a really brutal way in this movie, where he kind of shaves his own head. You worry that he's going to slice his neck open, because he's going at it with a cutthroat razor with gusto. That scene's phenomenal. Really, really powerful when he kind of then burns his head with way oversized incense sticks. I'm amazed that he didn't concuss himself or like literally set his head on fire for the size of incense sticks that he was burning his head with in that scene. But yeah, I think just very powerful in this, and then it's great that Tarantino kind of gave him a second wind and brought him back for a couple of parts in Kill Bill, right?
It's Pai Mei,
His Pai Mei performance, I think, was probably the better of the two. He played a smaller part in the first one. He was like Johnny 88, and but more of just a straight up action part in part one. You really got to kind of flex his chops and play a character that he'd gone up against in a couple of movies.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing about it. Yeah, like, is it Clan of the White Lotus? I think. That's the next kind of on my list. I'm going through all my Shaw Brothers ones at the moment, but.
Well, rumor has it that Lo Le, the actor who played the original Pai Mei in Clan of the White Lotus, was who Quentin Tarantino wanted to get for part two. It wasn't originally meant to be Gordon Liu, but he passed away not too far in the time that they were making the movies, and so wasn't able to do it. So Gordon Liu was the next best person to ask, given he'd acted against the real deal, right?
Yeah,
he made that part his own. He plays a great Pai Mei in Kill Bill Part 2.
For me, when I watched those movies when they came out, that part tickled me the most, because I was like, it's a stroking the beard, and it's I obviously grew up, real loving, like Sammo's portrayal of the long brows in Zoo Warriors, and I thought that when I watched that movie, it brought me back to a time of like just watching sort of very low rent kung fu movies, like just some like, when I see him as Pai Mei, I just think that brings such a kind of like a comedy to it as well. He's not like super serious. It's kind of funny, even though the stuff he's doing to like Uma Thurman is quite brutal.
Mm-hmm.
He's just laughing and flicking his beard in their face and like just being a complete cunt to her. And I think it's like one of my favorite parts of Gordon Liu. I just think he has that sort of, can be gravitas. I also recently seen him in My Heart Is That Eternal Rose.
Oh yeah.
He plays like a proper arsehole in that film.
Mm-hmm.
Again, with a really terrible wig, a really ropey looking sort of like Paul McCartney style wig that he's got through that movie. I think he gets ripped off at one point in it, and he actually find out he's actually Gordon. Oh, there he is. There's Bald Gordon Liu again. It's all as well. Seen Baldy Gordon Liu again. Yeah, he's a complete arsehole in that movie, but I just think
he's
he's so cool.
And a villain in Tiger on the Beat too. It's got a pretty great kind of.
Yes, he got
more
that
of like
chainsaw fight.
Yeah,
That just an insane bit of Hong Kong action is him just fighting fucking with chainsaws. Well, he's got a big bandage on his head, just ridiculous, like just a regular human being. So, what is this? How does Eight Dagger and Bullfighter stack up in his sort of oeuvre? Is this your favorite of his? Do you have some maybe prefer of his?
I think I'd maybe definitely say it's probably his best dramatic performance, or it's when he's kind of given his most heart wrenching performance. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. I think for me, my favorite performance of all of his movies is still Dirty Ho, and it might be because it was one of the ones that I saw so early on. But I think more than that, because I've questioned it over the years as I've gotten older. I was like, is this still going to hold up? Am I still going to feel the same way about his performance in Dirty Ho as I did when I first watched it? And I've just grown to love it even more, where I think that for me is the most enjoyable, like, because he's clearly just having so much fun and he's playing such a great mischievous part in Dirty Ho. But I think in Invincible Bullfighter or 8 Diagram Bullfighter, he's never been more intense and never been kind of more given more chance to kind of really emote in a way. Certainly not at Shaw Brothers. Maybe kind of you could argue that he got a little bit of a chance to do some of that after the Shaw's kind of wound down and some of the work that he found elsewhere. But I think 8 Diagram Bullfighter is his most that's the one that was most likely to get him an award at the Hong Kong film version of the Oscars, the Hong Kong Film Awards. You can maybe get best actor nomination for this one, because I think it's his most intense acting performance.
It's an acting darling sort of thing.
Exactly.
It's the one he's like playing for the Oscar.
Yes,
he got, I suppose, in a sort of way. He's playing for the cheap seats, essentially. But
exactly.
I think it's a cool. I mean, obviously, I'm kind of moseying along the sort of journey and learning about Shaw Brothers movies, learning about Gordon Liu movies.
Mm.
You know, I've obviously recently watched the Fetch's Chambers movies, Fetch's Chambers I love. Again, it's a different type of performance. It's more a little bit more comedic, a little bit more like play sort of like the sort of not dumb, but certainly like naive and like
Mhm.
there's a bit where they're all going to lunch and you need to go across this sort of like these sort of wooden little logs and they sort of like a pool. Like you need to get across this before you. If you don't get across it, you get wet. You don't get any food. So
Mhm.
you get good at this, and you show him sort of like some montage him learning and learning and learning, or like they really think he's like this kind of daft. There's always some person he's playing against that seems to feel like, what are you doing here? You've got no chance, and but slowly sort of wins them over, and even has this iconic sort of beginning. You know, the kind of credits and him doing the kind of the rings and
Mhm.
the sort of the poses underwater and stuff like that. It
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
just looks so cool. I think they just when you think about those types of movies, he's the kind of guy I see. You know,
Yeah.
he's a like if I look at those Shaw Brothers movies, he is Shaw Brothers to me, I suppose, in a way. I think
Mhm.
he's certainly those that type of kung fu movie for me. You know, I associate Jackie and Sammo with the more sort of kind of grounded in sort of the time. Whereas obviously those films, you know, when we're looking
Almost
at
all
a bit
period
more of a
pieces.
historical period pieces,
Yeah, yeah.
he's the kind of guy that I would go like, he's a safe pair of hands when it comes to those films because I can watch those films like I'm going to be watching Dirty Ho soon. Like you see, it's strictly not as different than those two movies I've discussed previously of Filter and French Chambers of Shaolin. They'll be a little bit different than that, but I think that when it comes to him, if I see him on a Blu-ray, I can trust this movie is going to be good because he's got a caliber that I can so appreciate.
Very much. He's kind of like maybe one of the most easily identifiable with or relatable. There's something about his performance on screen and his kind of his facial work, if I can say that, like the way that he
Yeah.
emotes through his face, that makes him very easy to identify with and empathize with. And I think it makes him really, particularly the movies where he's kind of, because often Kung Fu cinema is the cinema of the underdog a lot of the time. And so he's a very watchable, relatable, and very charming underdog to root for in the movies when he's kind of coming up that way. I'd say also add Heroes of the East, aka Shaolin Challenges Ninja, to your kind of watch list because that's a different performance from again, and so often we never really got male female relationships examined in that healthy a way in kung fu movies particularly. But Lau Garlung was always really interested in them, but through this martial arts lens, which is super weird in a way. So in Executioners from Shaolin, you kind of see like a married couple's first night after they've got married, and you kind of see the first attempt to try and have what people do on marriage night, but through a kung fu way. So it's kind of like a kung fu attempt to try and, but it's super charming. That makes it sound like it's a bit dodgy. With the woman who plays the mother in 8 Diagram Pole Fight with Lily Lee. It's Lily Lee and Chen Quan Tai in Executioners from Shaolin. And that's one of the first times you saw Pa Mei's character too. So that's another one to add to your list. But anyway, I digress of a digression. In Heroes of the East, Gordon Liu has gotten married to this Japanese girl, and they're culturally at odds with each other because she's very not like the Chinese girls that he knew, where she knows karate and she'll go out in the morning and smash his perfectly arranged garden when she's doing a karate practice, and they just can't kind of seem to get on. And so she ends up storming back to Japan, and he gets really drunk, as husbands whose wives have just stormed out on them tend to do, and writes this letter that I think in his mind's meant to say like, I love you, come home, but it comes out as, yeah, your martial arts are shit. It's probably better that you've left. So she sends back eight Japanese martial arts masters to basically challenge him, and before they've even arrived, the couple's made up again, but he still has to face off against these different Japanese martial arts masters, which ascends up to finally a master of ninjutsu at the end that he's kind of got to go up against, hence why it's often called Shaolin Challenges Ninja. But that's a really different performance from again. That's one that's really like, you get to see him doing domestic rom-com style comedy with his Japanese wife as well as doing martial arts. So yeah, he was an amazing all-rounder, right? I'm rambling on way too much about the virtues of Gordon Liu, but yeah, he was a superstar.
So normally I'd save this time for the trivia zone, but I feel this isn't really trivia. John, is a little bit too upsetting. But what we're going to talk about is obviously Alexander Fu Sheng or Sheng Fu. Brother Six in this movie. Now, as you sort of touched on a little bit earlier in the podcast, he was going to be the actual hero of this film. But tragically, during filming of this movie, he was out driving, took a turn too sharp in the road, and unfortunately hit his Porsche into a cement wall. Even though he was kind of initially only kind of badly injured, he would unfortunately go on to pass away a few years after the accident. The script was then rewritten, and Gordon would then, as brother Five would go on to play the hero. Unfortunately, we didn't get that resolution as you discussed yourself, that he would come back, overcome the sort of PTSD and despair and the sort of the anger he had towards the Tartars, and kind of join up with his kind of brother and his sister to try and fight all these guys at the end in the sort of I think it's sort of is that kind of a bar.
Yeah, I think so. Kind of sort of like tea house inn slash. Yeah.
But unfortunately, we didn't really get that. Do you think it would have been a better movie if he'd been the hero of this movie? Do you think that Gordon stepped up quite well to this movie? Do you think that, or do you think there is sort of a kind of air of this film that we discussed before, that, or a kind of air of tragedy that kind of changes the sort of the feel of this movie?
Don't know, because I think Fu Sheng's a tricky one for me, where partly because I didn't have as much exposure to that many of his films early on. He was a very different type of character, and an actor that I didn't always engage with as much as I did with Gordon Liu, and certainly not with Caraway. And I think it's her part that was bumped up the most, for her to kind of go off in search of Brother Five, rather than it being Fu Sheng that would kind of go off in search for his brother. So I think for me, I don't know if the movie would have as much resonance if he had survived through to the end. And I think it's not my favorite movie of his that he's a part of, where you could almost take out, like if and I don't mean to speak ill of the dead at all, and so I hope this doesn't offend anyone, but if Fu Sheng if his character had also met his demise at the beach at the beginning, I don't think it would have impacted the movie that much. We would have just lost the sections where he had kind of gone back home and was sort of struggling to come to terms with what had happened. Where I still think it's kind of Gordon Liu's movie, and probably always really was mostly going to be his movie. And I think when, as much as it might have been a double act towards the end, I think that third act probably would have been mostly the same, with him going to the temple and training and working with the monks and stuff. And that's kind of like the real beating heart of the film for ultimately kind of where it ends up. So no, I think is the short answer. I think although it's really tragic that it happened, and I think it would have been really interesting to see how his career would have evolved after Shaw's, because I think he probably would have gone on to do bigger, better things if he'd had the chance. And there's better examples of movies that he is a bigger part of. Like I'd say The Avenging Eagle's a much better film to remember Fu Sheng by, and some of his earlier work that he did with Chang Che, where he's kind of a lot more very similar to Jackie Chan's energy, that kind of mischievous Joker that you see in the early Jackie films, but also very physically capable as a martial artist. And he was I think he was actually in the running to be in Snake and the Eagle's Shadow at one point. He was things could have been very different if he got the film rather than it being Jackie that kind of got it in the end. I think he just wasn't allowed to get out of contract at Shaw's, is probably why he ended up not going over and doing it. But I think he was the first choice of Vince Yoon to play the part in Snake and the Eagle's Shadow, and that just didn't end up happening. But yeah, he was a really interesting performer. I think he was. There's other better movies of his to, I think, remember him by, rather than, it's a real shame that this was the last one that he kind of got a chance to work on, because I don't think it's his finest hour, even in the wee bits that we got to see in it.
Yeah, I mean, it does have. I mean, I do like him as an actor in this movie, and it does have a kind of a small but sort of interesting part in it. Kind of talking about you, kind of bounce off what you said a moment ago there, John, is that I've found myself, there's a scene, a specific fight scene with the sister when she goes off and she kind of meets these sort of bandits they've taken the Wulang staff, the pole knife, and I think that's probably one of my favorite fights in the movie, is that with her and this kind of bandit, they're just going at each other, and then obviously they kind of join up at the end to kind of fight, all together, and he meets his demise, but he's the one who immediately kind of finds, Gordon, the brother Five at the Shaolin Temple, and says, you need to come, and your sister's here, and they've been attacked and you need to come right now, and he's like, okay, so this is him sort of say like right into battle sort of thing, where you bat as many bamboo sticks as you can find, and you get in a cart and just kind of get into this sort of tea house and set about people. But yeah, I'm kind of in sort of the same camp as you. I think if he wasn't in this movie, I don't know if it would really be less impactful if he was taken out and he wasn't in this movie at all, and he had sort of met his demise at the battle, as you say. I don't think it would be any less of an impactful movie. I think it would just be, there'll still be gravitas enough to maybe even slightly more.
I think maybe we should say, like, maybe a more kind of respectful, less offensive way to big Fu Sheng fans for us to say is that I think his spirit left an enormous impact, which made the movie better. So I think
Yes,
his
correct. I would say
passing
so, yeah.
has kind of given that this extra emotional resonance and depth that because of the circumstances. And I don't think it would necessarily be the same movie if that hadn't happened. You never want to see somebody dying for their art. But it's a very different set of circumstances than The Crow, which we touched on a bit earlier, where he didn't die in the middle. This wasn't an accident on set, right? This was a kind of tragic accident that happened, I think, when he was on his way to set. So they're kind of driving to work, but it wasn't a case of a stunt gone wrong or one of these sort of situations. It was nothing at all to do with the production. It just impacted the production by his passing. And I think the effect that had on the crew and on Shaw's sort of tight-knit family, and indeed on his actual real-life brother, who's also in the movie. He's one of the other brothers at the beginning that you see.
Oh, yes.
So I think all these people would have felt the impact of his passing, and you can sort of see that through the performances of the people that had to come back together months later, because I think they took quite a long time off out of respect, and also if just people were too distraught to want to try and continue. And for a while there was an awful lot of speculation about whether they would ever come back and finish it, and maybe they would have just canned the whole project. And I'm very glad that they finished it, because I do think we've ended up with this incredible masterpiece of a film, but one that becomes really interesting not just to watch as a film, but also, as we've found over the last couple of hours, there's a wealth of stuff to dive into to speak about.
Yeah, I think there's always something interesting about these films where something tragic does kind of occur. You know, you talked about The Crow, you talk about obviously The Dark Knight. You know, there's Twilight Zone movie. You know,
oh god, yeah, that's about crazy.
That's just these things happen, and they just. I think it speaks to the production and the kind of camaraderie of doing this and going, no, we want to, this thing has happened and it's horrible, but we can honour him, we can do him a service by making this movie and making it the best way we can make it. I would hate for this to be a lot of lost media, you know. This, so we're kind of lucky in a way that this has happened, and not that this happened, it's just that we've got this movie and people just kind of pull together, and it's a spirit of, you know, just of kind of pulling your socks up and going, listen, this happened, but you know, he would want us to kind of push on. You know, he'd want us to finish this movie and make it the best we can do. And yeah, I think it's cool. I think we're kind of lucky to have, and we should thank, you know, him for, you know, his time on this movie, and we should thank the Oliver for giving us sort of a gift, I guess. That sounds really wanky, but do you know what I mean? I'm saying,
no, 100%.
I'm very happy. I've got incense beside me. That's why I'm going.
You did fine.
I see my incense sticks and was like, you know, like, namaste. Right. So let's end on a high note, Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I know this is a rhetorical question, but would you recommend this to the fans at home?
100% yes. 100% yes. I would I'd say maybe watch it in a part of a double bill with something that's quite light too. If it's your first foray into Shaw Brothers movies, if you're not that familiar with them, because it's uncharacteristically bleak and uncharacteristically dark compared to an awful lot of Shaw's productions, where they were generally a lot more kind of light-hearted affairs. Not always. There's some kind of other kind of tragic movies or pretty dark movies, but this one is particularly bleak and in tone, and maybe isn't the best example of what the studio was doing. And that's kind of why I think it's a really nice bookend for the studio in a way. But yes, I'd say if you are diving into Shaw Brothers for the first time, maybe watch it alongside one of the more light-hearted fare, and see, so you're giving yourself a chance, or giving the studio a chance to make the best impression on you for seeing what they were like. But yeah, 100% recommend it. Absolutely.
So do you have any final thoughts about, we expect to speak about 8 Diagram Pole Fighter?
Just that I think it remains as an incredible kind of time capsule for what was happening in Hong Kong at that point, for what was happening at Shaw Brothers at the time. It's really interesting if you watch it with one of the other movies, maybe make it a double bill with one of the other films from your what were the other action stars doing of the day. Watch this alongside Wheels on Meals for a spectacular
absolutely.
contrast
Yeah.
of
I would say
the
so. Yeah, definitely.
polar opposites of what was going on in Hong Kong in that same year. This and Wheels on Meals would be an incredible double feature. But yeah, an amazing legacy that it leaves behind, and just if it encourages more people from listening to us ramble to dip their toe into the world of Shaw Brothers, then my work is done.
Absolutely. So, I mentioned at the top of the show about your YouTube channel, The Fanatical Dragon. You've also recently started your own podcast called The Make the Avengers. Could you tell the creeps at home a little bit about that and your channel on the whole?
Sure. I mean, kind of YouTube channel's now on version 2 because my original channel was nuked by Toho for me very stupidly sharing episodes of an old Sonny Chiba TV series called The Shadow Warriors, which when he first played that character of Hattori Hanzo that he played in Kill Bill, he made 3 or 4 seasons of an amazing show in Japan that I was convinced had gone into kind of copyright-free territory, or was kind of out. That was not the case, which I only discovered after posting about 20 episodes. So I got 20 copyright strikes in a day.
Wow.
And my first channel got nuked. So my second channel, I'm not really doing any sharing of TV shows, quite rightly now, and it's mostly just unboxings and movie reviews and occasional interviews and sometimes live streams. Mostly East Asian cinema, but occasionally I'll cover other stuff. Sometimes if it's usually always action cinema, but sometimes it'll be from the States or other places. And then the podcast kind of naturally sprung out of that, just from me meeting other YouTubers. So it's me and two guys who I've become really good friends with over the last few years. Jason from the Martial Arts Theatre 3000, who's his channel is bigger than mine, but he does a lot of kind of old school kung fu focused videos and doesn't post as many videos as I do. I tend to post a bit too much probably, but he does really great deep dives into kind of sort of areas of Shaw Brothers or areas of Kung Fu cinema where we'll kind of do top 10s or top 25s, those sort of things. And then Sean, who's probably best known for the Food for Thought podcast, but has recently started the Food for Thought YouTube channel as well. And Sean's a Welshman now living in the States. So the three of us had come together on a few different streams over the last couple of years, and then realised that we really enjoyed hanging out and talking about stuff, and then also realised that Jason has seen fucking nothing after about 1998. So there was this wealth of new action cinema that we kind of wanted to introduce him to. So we're doing a mixture of examining old school movies, but then periodically doing what we're calling intervention episodes, where the two of us sit down and insist that Jason watches something new. So we just got him to watch The Raid for the first time ever. So our most recent episode, I think we're up to episode 4 now, and it's going to be once a month, and it's an absolute blast. So you can find that everywhere where podcasts are available. And then for those that like the old school kind of print media, I still periodically write the reviews for Eastern Heroes magazine. I do their Blu-ray reviews. And my great starting point for 2025 is I've just had a chance to be lucky enough to work on my first actual physical media release. So I've been able to contribute to the booklet for Enter the Panther, which is a lesser known Bruceploitation classic that's coming out pretty soon from TerraVision. So I contributed an article to the booklet in that, and that's up for pre-order already. So I'm pretty busy.
Cool.
Keeping busy. That's me, and you'll kind of find me as the Fanatical Dragon pretty much everywhere on Twitter and on Instagram, those sort of places.
That's amazing. Well, thank you again, Johnny, for coming on.
My pleasure.
It's been an awesome discussion with you. I've learned a lot from you. I've got, I think, a watch list as long as my arm, but that's okay because it's less time away from my dog. I'm joking. But yeah, I've really appreciated coming on to the podcast and allowing me to discuss this genuine martial arts classic. Hopefully we'll see you again on the podcast. I would love to have you back on. And maybe potentially face the Wheel of Cheddar on a future episode. So maybe find you a nice dodgy action movie to watch. I believe Blanks Are a Wings Hauser, maybe.
I'd be up for that.
One of those vintage classics. As usual, you can find me and this podcast, You're My Creep, on all podcast streaming platforms. Twitter, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, Your MC Podcast. You can follow our YouTube on Your My Creep Pod. Please go and follow me on that. I've only got 1 subscriber, and I think it's my mum.
Oh, I'll follow you after that.
You can also, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. That'll be 2 subscribers. You can also email the show with your queries and comments for our mailbag at yourmovecreeppodcast@gmail.com. And with that, bye for now, and I'll see you on the next episode of Your Move Creep.
Your move, creep.